For those I haven't met, my name is Kelly McAdoo, and I am the relatively new city administrator for Santa Barbara on 5 months now, so thank you. Glad to be here. And I'm really honored to be here with our 3 council members who have been serving on the Housing Crisis Ad Hoc Committee, and just wanted to, if we could go to the next slide. There we go, perfect. Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, who has been chairing this committee, Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez, and Councilmember Kristen Snedden, who have been working on doing a lot of hard work behind the scenes. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to just respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Chumash and Barbareño Chumash. We do honor the history, culture, and contributions of the Native peoples who have stewarded this land for generations and continue to do so today, and just want to let us recognize their enduring relationship with this land and express our gratitude as we come together in this shared space. So thank you all for being here. So what we're going to do this evening is our ad hoc committee members will start off and do a presentation. They have spent a number of months in conversation with a variety of stakeholder groups, organizations, individuals around the housing crisis that the city of Santa Barbara is facing. And they are going to bring back some of the findings that they have heard. Is the mic working? Okay. They're going to discuss some of the findings that they have heard over those months. And then what we're going to do is something a little unique, so bear with us. We have you broken down into tables by sort of stakeholder group. And what we would like, we have staff members who are going to sit with you towards after the presentation is complete to share a facilitated conversation, to hear from each of you that's here. We also have a number of participants on Zoom, and there will be a separate facilitated online discussion, but we want to hear, once we've heard the presentation, what's been missing, and then we're going to do a prioritization exercise of some of the findings and recommendations. What should we be thinking about as we bring this work back to the full City Council? And we will be coming back to the full City Council with a presentation on November 12th. And we will be sharing the prioritization results from the conversation today. And then just know that there is a lot of work still to come. So the next step would be to have the council express their preference and give us direction from for the staff team to continue the policy work that we've been doing. I want to just say a lot of the things that you will hear tonight a lot of these, the work has already started as the city's housing element has been, as we've been working through some of the programs in the housing element, and we can talk a little bit more about that if you have questions about that as we go forward. We do have a pretty tight timeline today. There will be a small segment for public comment towards the end of the meeting. There will also be an opportunity for additional public comment at the council meeting on November 12th. So I just wanted to share that. Today is about being in conversation with each other, and so that we can hear that feedback in a much more informal way. So just wanted to share that overview before I turn it over to the committee for the presentation. And is Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, you're kicking it off for us? Okay, so he is going to join us over here at the podium.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out to this. Really appreciate you. I want to appreciate my colleagues for being a part of this ad hoc and putting so much time and effort into researching and meeting with so many stakeholders in the community, and also the city staff for helping us out throughout the entire process and putting this specific event together. Thank you for your hard work for putting it all in place. So if we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to go over the committee objectives. The committee rely on local expertise and stakeholders to offer input, suggestions, and priorities for the council to consider in addressing the local affordable housing crisis. We also we're currently holding a community forum to solicit more community input over what we've researched, and then present to council the full suite of suggestions and emphasis on the top recommendation from the ad hoc committee with the goal of setting near and long-term priorities. And then I will bring up Alejandra Gutierrez, or you can stay there, that's fine.
Good evening, everyone. Issues overview. Am I doing something wrong? Critical affordable housing shortage. Over 8,000 now new units needed primarily for low-income households. The second is the high cost of living. The median home price is $2.2 million, and median rental prices for two-bedroom apartment is at $4,074, pricing out the residents. The homelessness is still an issue in our city. Over 1,800 individuals counted as homeless in the county, with 987 in the city. The next slide. Yeah. There we go. There we go. So this chart is showing how the city of Santa Barbara and the fifth RENA cycles, the target versus in process. And as we can all see, there is a huge gap between the very low and moderate. We are doing really well in meeting the numbers for the above moderate income. And this is why it's really important that we all work together to figure out a solution for the very low and moderate household, and that's where the need is.
Want to move around during the
They're seating up front. We have 8 seats up front. Sorry about that. Or you can stand in the back. We apologize. The projector is up.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And oops.
And continuing, is it on? Is it on? Okay, I apologize. And continuing on in the issue overview, what we can see on this slide is really some of the numbers to associate with this. We talk a lot about moderate income, workforce income, and we really want you to be able to see the numbers associated with that. So as a family of 4, you can make up to $120,000 and still qualify for deed-restricted affordable housing. That would be what would be included in inclusionary moderate income. So we really want to emphasize with this slide, oh, there it goes, with this slide, that you can make $119,000 as a family of 4, and that is what we would be talking about and considering as moderate income. And then next slide. And continuing on the issue overview, what's significant here on this slide is that half of households in Santa Barbara make less than $100,000 per year. This is where the need is the greatest, at the low and at the moderate workforce housing levels. Over 50% are at or below moderate or workforce. And important to emphasize here too, that income levels are not increasing at pace. So next slide. Our last slide on the issue overview, to look at what has happened with rent increases over time, particularly focusing on 2021 years and above. If referring back to the previous slides, if a family of 4 could be making $120,000, they could afford a rent of approximately $3,000. If we look at what happened after 2021, rents for 2 bedrooms in general, on average, are $4,000. For 3 bedrooms, $5,600. This is well above the affordable rate for over 50% of residents in our community. Extremely low income households experience 1 or more housing problems. Severe housing problems are defined as lacking a complete kitchen facilities, lacking complete plumbing facilities, more than one person per room, more than 1.5 persons per room, cost burden greater than 30%, or cost burden exceeds 50% in severe cases. Overall, 32% of owner-occupied households are cost burdened, and 17% of all owners have a severe cost burden. An estimated 63% of lower income households are overpaying for housing ownership.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go over all the stakeholders that we've met with. So we met with nonprofit housing developers and property managers like the Housing Authority of Santa Barbara, the Santa Barbara County Housing Authority, Habitat for Humanity, People Self-Help Housing, the Turner Foundation. We also met with elected officials like Congressman Salud Carbajal, State Senator Monique Limon, Assemblymember Greg Hart, as well as community-based organizations like the League of Women Voters, Importa and Immigrant Hope, Legal Aid Foundation, Leon, Santa Barbara County Adult and Aging Network, the 805 on Duck You Fund, the Cause and Santa Barbara Tenants Union, property owners, rental property owners as well, like mom and pop landlords, Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, Santa Barbara Rental Property Associations, as well as city staff and program representatives like the city administrator, community developers, the community developer director, Eli Isaacson, rental housing mediation board, as well as local union representatives from SEIU and the Santa Barbara Teachers Association representatives. Philanthropic organizations such as the Santa Barbara Foundation CEO, the academic institutions like Santa Barbara City College, President and Executive Director of Public Affairs and Communication, and business associations such as the South Coast Chamber of Commerce and the Greater Hispanic Chamber of Commerce as well.
So some of the findings, the challenges identified by tenants: higher barriers to rental housing, 3 times the income needed, above the 650 credit score, security deposits, and not accepting cosigners. Rental prices are far outpriced than wages, lack of compliance, no leasing agreement, timing for eviction notice, fear of retaliation and eviction, and the decreasing of housing supply.
And in meeting with a variety of stakeholders, we thought it was important to have very balanced meetings between different perspectives. And some of the challenges that we heard identified by property owners that we met with are that expenses are increasing, roof repairs, water and gas mains, electrical issues, rising construction costs, and rising costs of insurance are very real costs for property owners. We also heard that city ordinances and regulations are obscure or hard to find and not available in Spanish. Some property owners expressed fear of criminal prosecution because of complicated ordinances that are not well understood. Fear that if property owners don't keep up with the rental increases, that they won't be able to make up the needed income down the line. And delays in getting through the permit process of the city and associated costs that result from that.
All right, now we can go over the recommendations that we've collected. And remember, these are recommendations, so this whole workshop is for you all to discuss and give us feedback before we take it to the council. So one would be education and access to information to create more easily accessible city resources to help build greater understanding of the tenants' rights and housing provider rights and responsibilities. Ensure that information is available in multiple language and multiple modalities as well.
Increasing affordable housing supply, prioritizing more workforce housing for the missing middle, low to moderate income households, work to ensure with UCSB and SBCC to provide sufficient housing for their student population, dedicate permanent funding sources for the local housing trust fund.
And then we also heard loud and clear that we need to look to increase affordable housing supply. And one of the issues that was repeated with multiple groups was streamlining the permitting process and building process, that with dedicated timeframes and assigned city staff to shepherd projects through the process to save money. We also heard about prioritizing and are recommending prioritizing and fast-tracking nonprofit housing development projects in the permitting and building process.
Incentive programs. Creating incentive programs for housing providers. Tax incentive for below market rental units. Programs credits for improvement and repairs, allowing for capital improvement. Implement vouchers or rent relief program. Incentives for housing seniors. Safety net rent bridging programs for tenant facing short-term financial hardships. And part of the incentive program is also to expand down payment assistance for programs and education for first-time home buyers, expand diversity deed restricted housing loan programs, create initiatives for property owners to build accessory dwelling units, ADUs.
And this was a particular area where we heard a lot of different ideas from various stakeholders, and it's also an area that we are particularly interested in receiving input from the community, the public, yourselves, in support for innovation, innovative ideas, and things we might not have thought of or heard, including some ideas we heard were support for forming tiny home ownership program, developed and stewarded on city property, that could be ownership opportunities, facilitating more housing opportunities for single parents, so housing that might include childcare and youth services on site, and really leveraging public-private partnerships. We heard a lot about social impact investing, community-owned land trusts, employee-sponsored housing, co-op shared housing. These are areas in particular that we're recommending supporting innovation.
And we also discussed regulation and city programs, such as sustain short-term rental enforcement program, create a rental registry, implement rent stabilization ordinance, expand rental housing mediation program, consider mandatory mediation for certain rent increases, and sustain access to legal counsel. And now we can break out into some discussion groups.
So, Barbara, are you going to sort of give instructions on this one? Perfect.
There's the next slide, which is the questions that we'd like you all to consider.
Okay, this is why we're here. So I'm going to ask folks to categorize yourself. So there's 2 tables in the back that I think we can fill in a few seats up front, but we can absolutely keep an additional table. We have a tenants table up here. We have a resident advocate table up here. We have non-profit housing developers. And then you'll see community-based organizations. You'll see different placards on each of the middle tables. So we'd like for you to fill in the seats where you feel you want to represent your opinion today. And then we can add another table where you all are sitting in the back too. But there's a few seats here and there if you are categorized in those areas to sit around those tables. We have designated staff facilitators for in-person breakout groups. So that individual is going to help guide the conversation and gather your feedback. So we'll be having those folks circulate and sit among you. Some of you are already sitting. So raise your hand if you're a city staff facilitator already sitting down, and then we're going to fill in other facilitators as we reshuffle. Online, so we have a number of people who are participating virtually. So those questions are prompts that we'll be asking for your answers, and then we'll be collecting the feedback in that way.
Just to, the presentation, and there'll be copies of it. Your staff facilitator each table will have copies of the findings, and that is simply what the committee heard from the various stakeholders that they were in conversation with. So this is your opportunity if something is missing from those recommendations, or you have additional feedback that you would like us to share with the council as we come back. This is the opportunity for that conversation. So that's, we just wanted to reemphasize that as you're having your conversations at your tables. So thank you.
And as you reshuffle, there are refreshments to the side. If you want to grab something to drink before you sit down, that would be great. We're limited on time, so our staff facilitators are going to be keeping us on that schedule. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we're wrapping up conversations. All right, everyone, we're wrapping up conversations to stay on time. So thank you all for a very dynamic conversation, and a special thanks to our city staff facilitators for helping the group document their thoughts and opinions. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So we're going to actually have all of the city staff facilitators come up. Maybe it's best for you to just line up along the side here. I'll be the first report out to demonstrate how we're going to do this. But this is really speaking directly to the ad hoc committee. So each staff facilitator is going to report out a little bit of the group discussion. So we're going to start with what was missing from the committee's findings, and then we're going to list the top 3 priorities from our breakout groups. So we have enough time to do that, which is great. All right, so I had nonprofit housing developers. So as you can imagine, there was a lot missing from the committee's findings, even though they were interviewed. So I have, first, rent relief voucher programs are not sustainable. Instead, increase landlord incentives to support voucher holders. A pilot program to incentivize 100% deed-restricted affordable housing on city-owned property. Broader look at local preference to include live and work on the south coast of Santa Barbara. Allowing ADUs to be for sale with deed restricted at 80 to 120%. Increasing in lieu fees for private developers and the percentage. Reducing obstacles to affordable housing development. Defining community benefit as majority is deed restricted rental units. And again, just being really clear about defining the missing middle as 80 to 120,000 in terms of income. Adopt pro-housing designation that will help with funding, and an easier conversion laws for ADUs. So the top 3 priorities landed with 4, support for innovation, specifically leveraging public-private partnerships, which you can imagine from this group is pretty dynamic. The second was incentive programs, specifically creating incentive programs for housing providers and expanding down payment assistance programs and education for first-time home buyers, and then streamlining the permitting and building processes and prioritizing and fast-tracking nonprofit housing development. So thank you for your feedback in that group. I really appreciate it. Next facilitator.
Good evening. All right. So I was representing the community-based organizations table, and some additional items. Preserving existing housing stock. It's already cheaper than new housing. Rents go up while units are not safe or habitable. A lack of repairs or upgrades. Challenges identifying missing rent control that fits with increasing incomes and gives landlords a fair return on his investment This is necessary for long-term renters. Housing for the middle-class workforce. A lack of understanding by tenants about legal recourse if their landlord is not in compliance. Challenging for tenants working in low to middle income professions in essential positions, healthcare, city staff, helping professions, leading to hiring shortages. Protecting current families and tenants from displacement. More specifics on improving eviction protections, right to return with rent cap. Market-based housing costs out local workers, increasing instability as a community. Many locals and even YIMBYs seem to see displacement from a particular area as a result of the market as acceptable. But people are stronger and stay healthier longer when they are able to stay with their family and community. These connections make life meaningful. Need a better means of mediation and enforcement of tenant protections with ordinances. Volunteers are not the best option. One option, a paid staff that knows the laws and ties to the city attorney's office. Our priorities, top priorities were regulation in city programs, implement rent stabilization ordinance, support for innovation, specifically leverage public and private partnerships, and increase affordable housing supply, prioritize and fast-track nonprofit housing development projects in the permitting and building process. Thank you.
Sorry, what table was that?
That was the
Got it.
community-based organization.
And I have tenants. So one of the major ones was general access to information, especially in language equity for all information, not just for housing, but in general city business. And also, how are small businesses keeping up with housing costs for their employees? And of course, increasing affordable housing. How are other cities doing this? More education on low income and really looking at the barriers for entry into any type of housing. And the top three were the regulations and city programs, so that was as a whole. And as a whole also is increasing affordable housing supply. And the next one is a prioritization of more workforce housing for the missing middle, low to moderate income stakeholders, and that is the report out for tenants.
Hello, thank you, Dan Gullett, Planning Division. I was with this lovely table in the middle. It's called Landlords and Property Owners, which they rebranded and re-identified with housing providers instead. So these guys have a lot of ideas. I'll run through them as quickly as I can. First, rental subsidies paid by the city could be funded by general tax, spread the cost to all, not just property owners. There was a lot of talk on City College and UCSB and their responsibility with our housing problem. One idea was students should stay on campus and they should have housing provided by City College or UCSB. This comment is missing is an understanding that regulation of rent will reduce incentives for private investment into housing, will result in less new housing. This tourism is a strong revenue stream. Short-term rentals provide a retail, dining, activity, and bed and tax revenue and jobs. We need a rule book so that STRs can be part of the solution. Says best solution is city subsidizing rent for workers. Rent regulation will result in owners selling out Units, excessive ADUs will destroy neighborhoods, incentivize or require students to live on campuses. Rent control should not be embraced as it would create less rental availability, help UCSB create dorms for some of its students. Nothing is included in the recommendations regarding mom and pop landlords. Much of this group identify themselves as mom and pop landlords as well. This group is always mentioned as an asset to the community as the best housing providers and offer the lowest rents. Need to consider how to keep out-of-town corporations out and promote local ownership. A place for landlords to get help with troubled tenants, expand mediation to be fair and equal. Also, Coastal Commission to relax regulations to build more housing on UCSB and SBCC, state to add pressure. Don't make luxury housing for out-of-towners who want more here to move here as a priority. Don't overbuild luxury housing, focus on building low to mid-income for housing paid for by the city and subsidized rental by the city. Incentivize employers to build subsidized housing for their employees. ADUs are a helpful idea, but they must be limited in numbers, location to prevent harming neighborhoods. So those are the main comments, and the general support for recommendations. The slide on increasing affordable housing supply had a lot of dots, none particularly concentrated, and then incentive programs for housing providers in here. So, thank you.
Hello everyone, Timmy Bolton from the Sustainability and Resiliency Department. I was at the landlord and private ownership table. We had a great discussion. That kicked off with really focusing on education and access being key, needs to be both in English and Spanish. And with that education access, perhaps there isn't the same need to add a whole bunch of new regulations and existing protections given what's already on the books. There is a concerted focus on supply being a primary need as part of this, and perhaps rent control not being the solution based on equity concerns around those who have housing and those who don't. There is general agreement that the focus needs to be on affordability. As shown on the charts provided, we're doing a great job at producing above market units, so that there should be a focus then on the affordability component and perhaps especially the lowest and lower income groups. And there also may need to be a reconsideration of the definition to go perhaps above 30% spent on housing and rent, instead to go something perhaps a bit higher to reflect the local conditions. There was also a discussion about a lack of available land for construction, and perhaps there could be utilization of government surplus lands to create affordable low-income housing, further exploration of public-private partnerships. There was a great discussion about creating some new pathways from renting to ownership, including down payment assistance, a lease-to-buy strategy, first right of refusal, those types of components. In terms of ADUs, exploring a pathway to own those separately from the main home, including a financing program provided by the city that could lead to deed-restricted affordability component with that, as well as perhaps splitting underutilized homes. There was also an idea to explore some sort of like transfer of existing development rights to build higher unit densities and create better uses of land, as well as waivers for development costs for building truly affordable housing. And finally, there was an idea to include a component for employer-provided housing that would be on a short-term basis, so perhaps tied to employment terms, instead of the current paradigm where if they provide the housing, perhaps there's no ability to ensure that they're actually their employee long-term. Shifting to the priority side of things, there was general consensus that the target and objective should be focusing on creating affordable housing. The primary mechanism to achieve that would be through incentive programs. A bunch of those were mentioned in what we just discussed. and not adding additional regulations and burdensome things that could inhibit development, which also relates to a concerted effort towards streamlining the permit process to make building more units easier. And that concludes the work for my group. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Jasmine LeBlanc, Assistant Parks and Recreation Director. I was with the residents and advocates table. There was a lot of focus at our table on just an overall need to build more supply of housing of all kinds and to really explore areas to infill dense housing across the city. There was a consideration to focus on 15-minute neighborhoods and making sure that those new housing areas are walkable so that it's not putting a greater demand on roads and other infrastructure in the city. There was also an emphasis on making sure that the new housing is actually supplied at a range of sizes of housing and types of housing so that people of all household sizes have something that works for them. A look at considering local preference programs. For instance, perhaps when a place is up for a lease, people who are already in the community have priority for getting that lease. And really an emphasis on looking for solutions that don't add cost. So what can be done with existing government funds? There was a focus on the fact that Santa Barbara is currently not affordable for anyone at any income level. And so there's really a need to perhaps do some partnerships. For instance, look at tech sector organizations and see if there are ways to incentivize housing specific to those workforces. And an emphasis that utility costs are high, and those can be another thing to consider incentivizing to see if there's a way to lower utility costs that would be passed on to renters. And then really focus on trying to solve the root of the problem. So trying to make sure that there are jobs that pay well in the community so that people can afford to rent what's currently on the market. And then in terms of the prioritization, we had a lot of emphasis on the increasing affordable housing supply slide. So overall, really focused on everything on that slide, and particular look at how we can streamline the permitting and building processes. And we also had a lot of votes for leveraging public-private partnerships. Thanks.
Good evening, Joel Ruiz with Sustainability and Resilience, and I was over here on community-based organizations. Incentivize density in downtown. Supply is artificially limited. Supply is general, not just low to medium income. It will stabilize the price and downstream. A little bit more clarity, because there was confusion about affordable, missing middle, and workforce. Affordable rental for public employees, especially essential workers, teachers, firefighters. And their top priorities are form tiny home ownership programs developed and stewarded by city property, expand diversity deed restricted housing loan programs, and implement voucher rental relief program. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Metzger, and I'm a planner at the Santa Barbara Airport, and I had the tenants table up here in the front. So we first talked about enforcement of existing ordinances and laws and building codes, and the importance of that happening at all levels of the city. We also talked a lot about education as something that was very important in our group. Where do you check if a lease is legal? How do you learn about what is allowed or not allowed as a landlord? And what happens when the laws change? Is there any sort of education that's done by the city staff for the community? And so we talked about having some sort of office specific for this use, like it could be called the Community Empowerment Office. And it could have staff that was bilingual and something to give people that's between the regulation and getting red tagged and kicked out. We also talked about overcrowding and the problems that it causes with the services in the area, not just trash and parking, but also sewer and water. And it's not really the fault of the renters for being in an overcrowded unit. It really lies with the people who are renting out a bed in a room or multi rooms to many people. And so we looked at maybe a tax for people who do subletting like that. And then also a moratorium on hotels. So we focus on building housing and increasing the affordability regulation. It exists currently at 10% in the AUD program, but it doesn't exist outside of that program, and there's still a wide swath of the city outside of it, and we'd like to increase it. And also looking at increasing lease periods for more stability, especially for new families in an area. And then for our priorities, they all fell under regulation and city programs. And our first was creating a rental registry. The second was implementing rent stabilization ordinance. And the third was expanding the rental housing mediation program and looking at considering mandatory mediation for certain rent increases. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ed France, Downtown Parking and Plaza Manager.
I'm Megan Salas, Facilities Manager.
And together, we are representing and sharing back from the last stakeholder group, homeowners. So we had some great ideas to share on top of the solutions presented, which include property repair fund, a way to facilitate multi-generational and shared use around 2 to 3 bedroom homes instead of studios. So ways to share versus divide out space in existing homes. Employer responsibility for workforce housing. And then there was feedback related to costs and the costs impacting housing, such as utilities and construction. So one, I said control, and the group said no, cap construction costs, materials, labor, permits. And I said control for property sales costs. I said no, cap property sales costs. And then also in terms of the regulatory environment for homeowners who may act as landlords in a less formal way, there was sort of a cost incurred and interest in legal aid for landlords who are figuring out managing tenant protections.
And the homeowners' priorities. First was on the incentive programs, create incentive programs for housing providers. And then we had, second was prioritize more workforce housing for the missing middle, low to moderate income households. And the third was implement a voucher or rent relief program.
So we had all of you in active conversation in person, but we had 45 people on Zoom. So Brian's going to come up here and report out from those who were virtually participating.
All right, so our prioritization came in at increasing affordable housing and supply was first. Our incentive programs was second. And our third was support for innovation, including leveraging public-private partnerships. And we have a quite extensive summary from our about 30 or so residents who gave feedback. And so some of the missing findings here. So clarification and transparency was a focus. Many wanted to know how the figure of 8,000 housing units was determined, the time frame it covers, and whether it implies a permanent cap on development. There were also concerns about water supply, where units would be built, and how funding would be secured for housing projects. Policy suggestions. So several comments emphasized the need for rent stabilization, rental registries, and more concrete prioritization in the committee's plans. Others suggested that programs to assist tenants in understanding leases, budgeting, and maintaining housing should be developed. Impact of broader issues. So some raised concerns about the potential effects of Prop 33 on the committee's work, the need for support services for low-income families, and how property owners would be impacted by rent control and other regulations. Advocacy and representation was another focus. There was a noted absence of organized pro-housing advocacy groups in the discussion. That's what one said. Some suggested prioritizing very low-income groups and exploring infill and commercial reuse for new housing. A few responses stressed the importance of addressing the needs of key local workers, teachers, city staff, et cetera, and providing financial assistance to those recently homeless. There were also a call for a focus on seniors, exploring tiny homes and shared housing for them. Economic considerations, there was skepticism about rent control and concerns that current proposals might place an unfair burden on property owners and developers. Financing methods like land value capture were suggested as solutions. Some respondents felt the committee's proposals didn't account for the economic realities faced by developers and property owners. Respondents called for zoning changes, particularly addressing biases in zoning against smaller units, and suggested that Santa Barbara City College could provide student housing similar to UCSB. And some other factors that were included. Additional points included considering the impacts of Airbnb and housing, which we were looking at, ensuring access to essential services like public transportation and childcare, and addressing responsibilities of tenants alongside landlords. And that's it. One more group.
I think that's all the report outs. So I want to just thank everyone for the amazing participation. We are going to do, because this is a public agendized meeting, we're going to do a brief public comment section. Barbara and Nicole are walking around, so if anyone wanted to make a general public comment on this topic, we have some cards. Also, if you are online, please raise your hand so that we can have those public comments as well. And given the number of cards and that we've got about 15 minutes, I think we're gonna limit public comment to 2 minutes per. And if you could come up when your name is called to the podium to make your comment so we can make sure it gets captured on the Zoom recording, that would be fantastic. So Talia is going to call out the names. Please come up and make your public comment. Thank you so much, and we'll get started.
Lisa Sands, please approach the podium.
Hi, thank you very much, Council, for doing all of this work. It's intense. I'm angry. I'm angry that the solutions that are presented still don't work. I'm angry that people think if we run faster, earn more money, that we will solve these problems. So I'm asking the council to really look at what we've uncovered today. It's not a new subject. It's getting worse. And we can't afford to raise taxes. We can't. People are taxed overdone. So I beseech this council to look at these facts and utilize what we have in our city to accommodate affordable housing now. Thank you.
Brian Johnson, please approach the podium.
Good evening. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm with the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors. I wanted to thank the committee and the council members and the city administrator for putting this on tonight. I feel I feel positive and optimistic. I feel like we brought together a lot of different and diverse stakeholders, and we were able to listen to the presentation, review the recommendations, have a really honest and open discussion. I think that there were some really good recommendations that came out of it. Hopefully there were some good priorities that we really look at around supply, around education, around incentives, around partnerships, things like that. So I'm very optimistic, and I'd like to see this sort of thing continue. Thank you.
Corina S., please approach the podium.
Yeah, I just want to echo a lot of the things that you just said. Thank you tonight, for putting this organization together. As a tenant, we just want to have more dialogue and have people know what their rights are as an education in terms of like the landlords and for the tenants. That was a big theme for our table. And then as well as just prioritizing local workers and young families. So another suggestion was having offering multi-year leases, having that be something that, young families, like my friends who are recently having a baby, knowing what they can pay and what they're, going to have in the next couple years, so they don't have to move, with a newborn child, and that the landlord also knows what they can recoup in the next 2 years too. So anyways, there's just so many options that you can do. So I just encourage you guys to keep this going. Thank you.
Crucito Hernandez Cruz, please approach the podium.
Thank you. Haku, that's welcome in Chumash. Kwali Yoali, good afternoon in the Mexica language. Guten Tag in German. Buonasera in Italian. So as we go, good evening, everybody. My name is Crucito Herrera Cruz. I'm running for District 1. Vote for Crucito Cruz. If anyone's listening out there, you got me. So I have 3 points. I think it's important. I'd like to thank Robert Fredericks, who I had the plan, his brochure about there's a waiting list for people in low-income housing and extremely low-income housing in the city of Santa Barbara. There is a crisis. From the 5th cycle of the regional housing allocation to the new 6th cycle, it has doubled. We need ordinances to be drafted and enacted, all stakeholders, to address and codify the RAHNA numbers to be in compliance with the new and ongoing developments. That would help to mesh the need that is overlooked, the low income, extremely low income. Inclusionary housing in the county ordinances has only one formula for affordable housing. You know what that is? It's based on home ownership, property taxes, and mortgages. So when we define affordable housing, we have to look at it, be clear, concise, and define it for what it is. Because affordable could mean someone in the AMI for 119. It could also mean someone that's getting $20,000 a year. How do we go ahead about funding this?
Your time is up.
Oh, I have
Thank
funding.
you.
TOT
Rachel
tax.
Sim,
TOT.
please approach the podium. Rachel Sim, please approach the podium.
Good evening. Thank you, council members, for hosting this discussion forum and for all of your recommendations and hard work. Mostly, I'm here just to please beg for a rental registry. I really feel like that is a great way to ensure that all actors are playing fairly, are playing by the rules. I think transparency in that way could go a long way to easing some of the tensions that exist currently, especially on the tenant side. There's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that we don't know about. It's a lot harder to trust when you don't know why those decisions are being made, and I think a rental registry would be great for that. I don't see any reasonable reason for anyone to object to that. I have 2 concerns regarding some of the findings today. The first one being related to things like city grants and rent subsidies. I'm concerned that that is passing the cost of housing on to the city, which essentially means that tenants and homeowners, but the city the citizens are now paying for people to live in homes that are, of varying quality, and allows unscrupulous landlords to increase the rent at the expense of both the city and everyone else in our community. And I also have a slight concern, you've mentioned potential for grants and subsidies for property owners to make changes and improvements to their building, and I just wanted to name the concern that how do we know, I would like to know that these kinds of subsidies are not going to be something like the PPP loans that we saw during the COVID pandemic, where those people who have access, time, and finances are able to get access to those resources, whether or not they actually need them. And it would be a pretty big slap in the face to have a
Thank you,
homeowner
Rachel. Your time is up.
raise the rent after getting that money.
Daniel Rhodes, please approach the podium.
Hi, I'm a tenant here in Santa Barbara. Thank you all for this nice event. I love the setting. It's very beautiful. It's been a nice kind of calm discussion. I just wanted to raise that, the word crisis is in the name of this task force, and I don't feel the crisis in this discussion. I know we need to have respectable and civilized discussions and all that, but I just want to raise that the people that are feeling this crisis the most are tenants in this city. The people who are feeling this crisis are the ones who have pay or quit notices right now that could be bogus, that could be harassing, or just because they can't pay, or the people who have 60-day notices who are, expecting to be evicted in the next couple of months, people who know that when their next lease comes around, they won't be able to pay the rent increase. Those are the people who are really feeling this crisis, and that is why we need rent stabilization now, modern rent stabilization with a rent board, with a rental registry. That's the kind of stuff we need to stop this bleeding, to make sure that this community can stabilize itself again. And of course, we need to look to the long term. I want to see denser housing built in Santa Barbara as well. But this is a crisis. We need to act now. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Melton, please approach the podium. Mark Melton.
Thank you for the work you've been doing. I think what concerns me is I think sometimes we're conflating two issues. One is the affordability and coming up with low income housing or housing for people who are at that second half. And I really think that's kind of an important function for the city to address. But I don't think they should do it at the expense of driving out private investment. I'm an owner of units here in Santa Barbara. I built within the last 5 years 12 new units over on Mitchell Terrain and Castillo. And to be honest, I don't think I would do it today, because when somebody makes an investment, they make an investment hoping or expecting to get a certain kind of return on their investment, and to have an expectation that you know what's going to happen. And right now the environment is so fraught to me. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to have rent stabilization. I don't know if all the other things. I had the opportunity. I could build more units on some of the properties I already own. I'm not doing it, and I probably won't do it until I see that the city council makes, a wise decision. To me, that's invest and incent people to make investment. I'm not even asking for the subsidies. I don't need that, but it's expensive to build here. I just want to know that my property rights aren't going to be taken away from me, that I'm not going to have all this government interference. I'm not the bad guy in all this. I'm willing to provide housing. I just don't want that. So you guys go ahead and do what you need to do in terms of building low-cost housing, creating all that. But the folks that at my table, we're all retired. We did this as retirement income. I'm living off of this in my golden years, so
Thank
to
you,
speak.
Mark. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Lloyd Beardsmore, please approach the podium.
I'd like to start by thanking the committee. You've spent, I know it's at least 1.5 years, if not 2 years on this. The problem I have is we come here, we've got 2 hours to try to look at your solutions, and then now it's going to go to council. It seems like a meeting like this can bring a lot of parties together to look at solutions that maybe we can all work together on. And when I hear tenants say that there's a housing crisis, I believe there is a housing crisis. But it's not just felt by tenants. It's also felt by rental property providers and landowners, like you just heard. Everything that keeps happening with with tenant protections, with rent control, and talk of a 2% rent cap is driving rents up. It's making things worse for tenants. It's raising rental criteria. It's hurting everybody, and it's time for us to try to come together, not in a 2-hour window when we're feeling like we've got to hurry up and respond to this. Why aren't we if you've taken 2 years for this committee, why not 2 or 3 or 4 more meetings like this before we all have to come to a council meeting where it lasts for, from 2 o'clock until 10 o'clock at night or longer to try to work together? So I would ask that maybe we have a few more of these and see if something else can be done. So I think that's it. And not just looking for short-term solutions, but long-term solutions that work for everybody. Thank you.
Mark Zimmer, please approach the podium.
First, I'd like to thank our city administrators and the people who they've guided us in a lot of these tables and breakout groups, especially ours, who heard everything we said. I'd like to indicate also, I want to thank our council members too for dealing with our constituency here, not only the owners, but also the tenants. My statement is that we are not in a crisis. This is an emergency and someone needs to pull the fire alarm. I don't know, that sounds like, hyperbole, but Santa Barbara's housing is not affordable for anyone was the theme that I heard. That was the one comment that stood out to me during this whole process. I'd like to salute Rob Fredericks because I feel that public housing agencies are ones that used to be called redevelopment agencies, and I feel that under Rob's guidance and tutelage, we could actually create the alliances that, and he has already done this many times over. I hear a lot of numbers tonight. Individual ordinances create a long list of fragmentation, and the term rent control carries a stigma with it. It's like a boogeyman. The term must be more rent stabilization. Somehow we need to stabilize in this process. And I'd like to plant a seed in closing that we form a City of Santa Barbara Housing Reform Act and create a cohesive plan that covers all these factors, including the rent registry, rent eviction to conform with Goleta, and a tenant right to counsel. Thank you very much.
Wendy Santa Maria. Wendy Santa Maria, please approach the podium.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to our council members for all 3 of you being here today and listening to our concerns. I want to echo what a lot of folks in the room have said, that this is truly an emergency, and it worries a lot of people in the city that this isn't being acted on with the urgency that it needs. We have seen a lot of studies and frankly a lot of tax dollars being spent and wasted on outside consultants trying to come in and tell us what our city needs. But I really want to encourage our council to look at the lived experiences here, not just the ones in this room, but the ones in our various districts, because I think the solution is here. And not just in this room, it's out there in the community, but we need to look at the fact that yes, developers are struggling to build, but we also need to look at there are 5 to 6 families living in a unit. There are people living with mold and carpets that haven't been replaced in decades because, even if the rents are raising, things aren't getting fixed. We need to understand that this is a matter of public safety. Our first responders can't even live in our community, and highly encourage, again, our council members, Listen to the community. The data's here, the answers are here. We just need to listen and act with the urgency it requires. No more kicking the can down the road. Thank you.
Stanley Sankoff.
Hello, everyone. Appreciate the staff's work on all this. I know there's a lot of really advanced outreach on this, which was really great to see. I just like to stress that not all these ideas are in the same league at all. This crisis task force was created out of a groundswell of tenants and allies who came together because we said enough is enough with the skyrocketing rents, and that rent stabilization and a rent control like ordinance, a modern rent control ordinance with a rental registry was long overdue. It's broadly popular. It's certainly not the only tool in the toolbox. So many of us have been working on looking towards the future and working on funding and financing of housing and changing the landscape. But let's not lose sight of the fact that this city is painfully long overdue for some sort of reasonable rules of the road, so that if you're a business in town, you are able to do things ethically and in a way that meets our city's needs. So I really hope that we don't lose sight of that. I'm really glad to see a lot of the ideas that are in the room, and that there's actually more and more diverse voices in the room, because oftentimes these spaces aren't built for working class tenants. And so again, want to give a nod to the staff for their work on that. But let's not lose sight of the fact that rent stabilization, a rental registry were core to why we're even here today. Thanks.
Stephen Pataglia. Thank you.
Council members and staff, thanks for being here, and thanks for putting this forum together. I think the one thing that's unanimous that I heard today is everybody is in agreement that we need more housing units here. That's one of the basic elements that everybody's looking for. But the problem is everybody keeps talking about rent stabilization as the answer to that, and that actually has the opposite effect. And I have here, and I'll hand these to you guys, Peter Rupert put together a great paper on what happens under rent control, rent stabilizations, and it has that opposite effect. It also has the opposite effect of increasing rents for people coming into the city, and that's not what we're looking for. It's well documented. I also have an article, Argentina just scrapped their decades-old rent control. And everybody can Google this. Once they did that, Buenos Aires rent supplies increased 170%. People brought rental units on that had taken them off the market, and they started building again. Rents declined 40% when they did that. These are real-world impacts, that's happens during or happens to communities that implement rent control. Now, if we did a rent control, rent stabilization, short term, you're going to kind of get a little bit of relief, but in the long term, you're going to hurt. You're going to not be happy. You're going to dissuade developers from building, and you're going to see rents continually to go up. So anyway, thank you. Oh, the other thing I wanted to comment on our table, somebody brought up employer-provided housing. That was probably the best suggestion I heard all night, is if there can be incentives and protections for employers if they provide housing to their employees so they're not just subject to state laws. I think that's huge. I've had several employers talk to me about looking for housing, wanting to house their employees and pay for that housing for them. So that would be the best thing I could offer.
Rob Fredericks.
Good evening, everyone, and city council members. Thank you for all your work on this effort, and I know you spent a lot of time with me and my team delving into some of these questions, and I know if you spent a lot of time with me, I try and be brief, right? And I'm sure a lot of other people you spent time with doing this, and I've heard a lot of good ideas tonight, and it is nice bringing everybody together on this difficult issue of providing affordable housing to communities. It is so essential to the health of our community. And lucky enough, we're not the only community suffering with an emergency affordable housing crisis. Communities all across the nation are suffering this, and they're facing the same issues. What we need to do is really look at some of these ideas that were brought tonight and lean into some difficult decisions. City Council is going to have to lean into some difficult decisions for the betterment of the community. And I personally, long-term rent control does not benefit a community, but we are in a housing crisis, and maybe some short-term stabilization measures would be beneficial. I also, I do think a rental registry would help the entire community with up-to-date data that we can really see what's going on. So I put that out for you. Also, just want to take another opportunity to thank the city for a wonderful housing element that's been adopted by the state. It's chock full of great data and good information, a lot of good goals in there to follow. Thank you.
Ellen Bilston.
Good evening. I'd just like to kind of emphasize the word that we're using so much tonight, which is affordability, and offer an idea about how it is that we can achieve that, and the importance of thinking about public-private partnerships all the way through how it is that we're approaching getting housing done in our community now that we're all recognizing what a crisis situation we're in. I think if we see public-private partnership as the core of how we move forward as a community, united in our determination to get housing done, it might actually happen. There are all the other partners in that, of course, are property owners, developers, and the city to allow for projects to move forward. I think there are lots of opportunities before us, like real time, ordinances that are being considered, the adaptive reuse ordinance that's currently being considered, the ODDS design or objective design standards that also now includes development standards. I think there are all sorts of ways that we can be looking carefully at what sort of ordinances the city is approving so that they are pro-housing and allowing housing to move forward. I want to sort of put a special emphasis on my concern about where we're headed with ODDS, which doesn't feel like it's going to move us in that direction. The intent, I believe, was to streamline getting housing done, allowing for pathways that don't use the usual design review process within the design review boards, and to allow an easier pathway forward. And I'm concerned that that has become something that's quite fraught and probably not going to move us in that direction.
Ben Allen.
Hello, thanks for giving me the time to speak. Thanks for trying to come together to make a solution for this. I'm of the opinion that all the solutions to our problems already exist. It's just they're not easy because it doesn't brook political expediency to ignore the basic fact that there's a conflict of interest between tenancy and landlording. Because at the end of the day, the only way that a landlord gets more money is by taking it out of the tenant's pocket. And the only way that the tenant can survive is to make sure that they have enough to get by at the end of the month. So when we're looking at solutions to this, we can't just hedge our bets with market-based, bonds and such to stem, the problem, because it's not addressing the root of it even a little bit. If we want to address the root of it, it's got to be right at the heart of the issue, which is the basic fact that nobody is not making enough money on a basic level working a job. They are losing their money to landlords that are exponentially raising rents year over year, and it is slowly becoming impossible for people with normal jobs to work in the city, even if they were born here, even if they've been living here for several generations, because there's no getting around the fact that eventually the rent comes due, and if you don't have the money, you're out on the street. And we got to ask ourselves, how many more people are going to wind up dead in the creek because they couldn't afford rent, and because they got kicked out of their apartment because they didn't have enough money to make it? Housing is not just a thing that we get, at a shop every other day. It's a basic necessity. It's the first step to having a life in this country.
Thank you. Final speaker, Suzanne Cotton.
Thank you. It's Suzanne Cohen, but that's okay. I'm here as a business owner. I and my husband have a small business within Santa Barbara, and I have, want to partner with the city to solve this problem. It impacts a lot of small business owners. I'm surprised that there's not a table of small business owners here. It makes it difficult to keep our employees. It makes it very difficult to attract employees to come here. I mean, we have to, every year, there's people that leave this area because they're not able to afford to stay here. And so I think that the city needs to bring small businesses, medium-sized, large businesses into this conversation more. I've mentioned before to some of you that there isn't really a path for us to provide employee housing as small business owners. We would like to purchase land, purchase and build, do something, but I don't want to do it just for anyone. I want to do it for the people that are, that we've invested in as our employees, and hopefully that they're able to eventually buy in this community and stay here long term. So I just want to say that, there's a lot of us that want to help and to be a part of the solution. Small businesses really want to do that, and if there's a pathway to do that would be explored, I'd really appreciate it. I also want to say, as a small business and as a homeowner who has gone through the community development department, that it is broken. It is completely broken. In order to get through to build anything, it takes way too long, and the process is so cumbersome that only the very, very wealthy can navigate it, and it needs to be an accessible
Thank you.
path.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to just, I want to give the council members a brief opportunity. I know we're supposed to wrap at 7:30, but give them an opportunity to make a few closing comments. But just a couple of the next steps to remind everyone, we will be back at council on November 12th, and this is not the last community conversation on this topic. I know there was concern. We're not just having this 2-hour conversation. I think there will be lots of continuing and ongoing community dialogue about these policy proposals as they come back to council. And a lot of this work will continue to cross over with the implementation of the housing element. So just wanted to reiterate that. Logistically, we will be posting all of the materials from tonight on the city's website. There will be a housing crisis committee webpage. Also, if you didn't get it, there's some QR codes so you can download the presentation. So if anyone needs this, we'll have them up here. But I wanted to turn it over to the council members to make some closing remarks.
I'll open it to my colleagues first.
Okay. We met as a committee and put our recommendations forward as a committee. I believe we really kept open minds and met with groups many, many times. I was a little surprised by the comment that this is rushed or not enough time. I think the commenter on that comment we met with 3 separate times, more than any other group. I really do feel that we have heard the community, and I feel that we have stalled and waited too long to make action. I'm going to speak for myself now because this was a committee presentation, and as we have individual comments, I'll just make my comments for myself. We are in an affordable housing crisis. We have been for several years. We agreed to meet as committee, to meet with stakeholders. We tried to make that list as broad as possible to really keep an open mind. We heard a lot of innovative ideas, things we hadn't thought about, things that we would, as a collective, like to support and like to bring forward. But over half of our households in our community are rent burdened or extremely rent burdened. This is our workforce. These are our families, teachers, first responders, nurses, essential workers. Our own city workers can't afford to live in the city they serve. They come when there are broken water mains. They come from out of town. They have to drive long hours or stay in hotel rooms overnight so they can serve our community. We have a community crisis. I think we're risking decimating the stability of our community. It has reached crisis proportion. We've brought forward ideas that have been carefully considered. These aren't the only solutions that could come forward. The conversation isn't over. I believe that we as a collective are truly trying to come up with solutions, and it won't be any one solution all by itself. I want to explain what I mean by rent stabilization, because sometimes we hear rent cap 2% or extreme different caps and different definitions. So I, for myself, want to take this opportunity to describe what I mean by rent stabilization. If something is a duplex, and this is not the committee recommendation, I just want to be really clear. If something is a duplex, 4 units, start off at market rate. Start off at whatever it needs to be so that you as a housing provider can make the profit that you need to make, the profit that you need to make over a long range. Then have the rent increases be moderate amounts, and then if a unit becomes vacant again, bring it right back up to market rate. I'm not suggesting that housing providers not profit. I'm suggesting that for the stability of our community, so that property owners, housing providers know what to expect over time, and renters also know what to expect over time. The stabilization that I'm talking about is for our children, for our families, for our essential workers, and really for our whole community. I'm aiming for this type of stability. I was ready 2 years ago. We agreed to have committee meetings and keep open minds to see what, in addition, or what else could be considered. I think we have spent a lot of time and really appreciate everyone that we met with and the ideas that were brought forward. But since 2021, and shown clearly in the slides, the problem has only gotten worse. With 2 bedrooms that are being rented for $4,000 or more. I just saw a sign off Las Positas right on the highway. 2-bedroom, $4,000. This is not sustainable. There won't be only one solution. We need to prioritize the missing middle, the workforce housing, at the 80 to 120% AMI. This is the majority of residents in our city at that 80 to 120 and below. We need dedicated funding source for our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Work with our nonprofit housing providers. We can fast track deed-restricted projects. I love the ideas of adaptive reuse, leveraging public-private partnerships. I support all the items listed under innovations. In my mind, these would be in addition to a rental registry and rent stabilization. I believe the time is now, We can keep the conversation going about how to support small businesses, how to support streamlining for real our processes, opportunities for employer-sponsored housing. But I do believe that at the top of the list is rent stabilization.
I want to thank the city staff that really helped us along throughout. It's 2 years, I would say, of meeting with community members, and I'm really happy of the turnout. This is beyond what I expected. I normally don't take credit for things, but I'm definitely going to take credit. This was definitely an idea that I brought up, and it came from me working in education and knowing that not everybody will have the chance to meet with my colleagues and I during those meetings throughout the day. So giving the community the opportunity to be able to come and speak to us and voice their opinions during the evening it's great. And then with the new city administrator and city staff that brought the ideas by getting it from the community members of broadcasting it Zoom, it's also something that's the city's doing new, and I think hopefully we can continue having meetings like this. I've been very vocal about working as a community, and I believe that for me it was really important that we didn't hire an outside person and paid them the money the work that we could do, because we, as the people that live in this community, I believe that we can find our own solutions, especially the city of Santa Barbara being very unique than other cities in the state. And I thank my colleague Oscar Gutierrez for proposing that in council, and this is how the ad hoc committee was made up, because we really thought that we can get the input of the community members to solve our housing crisis. I also have been, it's not a secret, I have my reservations about rent stabilization or rent cap, because I'm not a true believer that if there's going to be a serious consequence on a particular group of people when a decision is made, that there should be another solution. And I believe the housing crisis is something that affects all of us, and we need investors, developers, the financial institutions also involved to be able to help us solve this solution. There is a crisis, but we can't be reactive to the crisis. We really have to think long term. The reason there's a crisis because we didn't, before the colleagues and I that are in the council, we didn't think of these long term effects. And in reality, the city infrastructure wasn't built to have so many people in the city. And the colleges also, as many as you guys discuss, also brought in a lot of people from the outside. They didn't think about housing their own students. So now we're faced with the situation at the city, and I'm just really thankful that everybody took the time to come and share their ideas. And on November 12th, we will make a decision. But I just want to echo that it is really important that everybody is represented. And as a council member, I have to think of the greater good and the impact that my decisions will have in 10 years from now, and not being reactive. So thank you very much for everybody that's here.
Hello, 1, 2, all right. Thanks again, everyone, for showing up, taking the time out of your lives to come let us know about how you feel about these issues. And I'm going to agree with my colleagues over here that the time is now. I think previous councils delayed any action to the point that we're at now. We're in a crisis because of a lack of action, and I refuse to sit by and delay this any longer. I just, for an example, the dangers of this. Last night I got a call from a friend who said she saw her neighbor breastfeeding her child while she was sitting on the curb of the street at night, and she thought that was odd, so she stopped and asked what's going on, and she said that they were kicked out of their house, and they didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't know what to do. So we have people who are literally having to breastfeed their child in the gutter in Santa Barbara. This wasn't a third world country. This was last night in Santa Barbara. So luckily my friend was able to pay for a motel for that family. But yeah, I'm not going to sit by and delay this one more day because that's already too much. So I'm looking forward and eager to hear what my 4 other colleagues that aren't here, a part of this ad hoc, have to say about these recommendations. And I'm really hoping that we can make some stuff happen because I don't want to get any more phone calls like that. So again, thank you very much. Really appreciate all your input. And please keep in touch because as the city administrator said, this will be discussed again on November 12th, and hopefully we can make some real change. So thank you.